Hey there, and welcome to our presentation about our discussion of the decline of the Roman Empire. We spent a lot of time building up the empire from its earliest, tiniest little baby Rome there on the Palatine Hill, way back, 500 BCE-ish, somewhere around there, and now here we are, all the way at 200 CE, and we're going to start to fall. So you guys argued, a lot of you argued that it was founded around 27 BCE with Augustus, or a little bit earlier with Julius Caesar. And you already know that it covered so much of the Mediterranean world, Europe, Asia, Africa, and so much of it is still there. Looking at this map though, you can see that even though some of you were so sure that the empire started back in 27 with Augustus, or maybe a little bit before that with Caesar, maybe a couple of you saw, maybe with Sulla, but really way back, even, before 100 BCE, the empire was already taking shape. It was already taking over the northern Mediterranean. So by the time that we see it here at its height, and around, 140 to over 200, when it's really at its best, that's what we recognize. But it was already being an empire, you guys. It was already acting like an empire. Even right there, it was acting like an empire. By the time it took over the boot of Italy and started moving into mainland Europe, it was already acting like an empire for sure. These maps sure as heck don't lie, and they prove that even though the empire liked to call itself the teeny little republic, it certainly had huge ambition. But sitting here in the US right now, it's hard for us to understand how much power that the Roman Empire really had. But it's easy for us to it helps us if we try to put it into context. If you look at the Roman Empire, it's going all the way in the north from Britain to way down in the south in Africa, in kind of middle Egypt, all the way to the Red Sea. So they controlled a lot of water, not just the Mediterranean, but also the Red Sea, kind of those channels to getting over into Asia and some of those Asian shipping routes. But from north to south, it's very similar to the United States, from Canada all the way down into Mexico. Another way that's really interesting, how it's similar to the United States, is the provinces. We've got 50 states, they had 44 provinces, and as we know, part of Augustus's reforms, they start to put these governors all across the empire in order to keep the provinces controlled, in order to manage the money of the provinces, in order to, manage the system of Rome. And here's one of these trade maps like you've been looking at this week, and, showing all these goods that are flowing in from across the empire, all these resource-rich places that Rome may not have access to, like metals and olive oil, things that are essential for the Roman way of life, flowing into Rome, across those Roman roads, on those Roman ships across the Mediterranean, making the empire great. And here's another view of some of the other goods that are across the empire, like silk coming from China, like pepper coming from India. This map's a little bit better in terms of it showing its connection to Asia, and all of these goods coming from, along the Silk Road or along these trading routes all the way across the Indian Ocean, and that found their way into Rome, that found their way all the way up into Britannia, way up present-day Great Britain. But as we know, one of Augustus's goals for his reign was to make Rome the jewel of the empire, make Rome the capital, the place that shows kind of the strength and the power and the beauty and glory of Rome, really. And that starts most certainly, right here, kind of in this forum, the area of the forum. And even though this might look like a photo, this is actually a very old model made by an archaeologist starting in 1935 to kind of recreate what ancient Rome looked like. This is pre-digital, even though I know that you've seen this Rome reborn that has this complete digital recreation. This is the new project. It's kind of like the updated version of that old model. And let's kick off our tour of the Roman city by looking at the Arch of Constantine. Even though this happened a little bit later than what we've been talking about so far, it's really this striking piece, and all it really is it's kind of the precursor to a photo album. Instead of having a photo album or instead of having a mural painted for somebody, you're going to make this giant arch to celebrate Constantine defeating his rivals and becoming the Emperor of Rome. And really, all this fancy language, all it means is Constantine is extra. He is awesome, and we want to celebrate him. And if you were looking at this up close, and you can walk up to it today, they're right there near the Forum, right near the Colosseum. You can see all these pictures depicting Constantine in battle, and all of these, statements about how great he is, and how the people of Rome and how the Senate, think he's totally awesome. And it's still there today. You can walk right up to it and look at all of these things. But something really important to understand is how much the Arch of Constantine and other architecture like it and other art like it has influenced what's come after it. All of these arches all around the world are completely inspired by the Arch of Constantine, whether there's some of the Brandenburg Gate, there's a gate in Berlin, there's one in South Korea, and even that one on the far right down there in the bottom, that is the front of the Grand Central train station terminal in Washington, D.C. But first, let's go to the CenturyLink field of ancient Rome, Circus Maximus. This is where chariot races happen. This is the place. And you can see it's connected to the Imperial Palace. The emperor himself can walk right down from his own house and sit in that fancy box to watch all the chariots and the charioteers and all of the parades and pomp and circumstance. This was a massive, massive stadium, and it seated about 150,000 people at a time. Of course, there were a lot of stadiums like this, but this was the largest. And this one was built under the reign of Julius Caesar in about 50 BCE. Here it is today. It's quite a bit less impressive than it was at the time, but you can see there in the distance there's still some of the ruins of the Imperial Palace. Makes me kind of wonder what will be left of CenturyLink Field in 2,000 years. Now let's move on to another famous landmark of the ancient Roman world, probably the one that we most identify with ancient Rome. Still standing there today, the site of gladiator battles and all sorts of dangerous combat. The Colosseum was built between about 70 and 80 CE by the Emperor Vespasian, built of sand and concrete. Concrete was one of those things, one of those innovations that the Romans brought to the world. And it opened in 80 CE, and it had its kind of inaugural games. And we know about those because they were written about by historians, but also because they minted coins of the event, seated 50 to 80,000 people, depending on the event. And of course, not only did they have gladiators, but they had these fake hunts of animals, and they had battle recreations. They even had sea battle recreations, which is something that I think for most of us, it kind of blows our mind. But really, the Colosseum wasn't even called the Colosseum. It was known as the Flavian Amphitheater, after the kind of the line of emperors that built it. But what it was referring to is this statue that is long gone of Emperor Nero, called the Colossus of Nero, and in Latin, Colosseum just means that place over by the Colossus. So, nobody called it the Colosseum at the time. Now, of course, we could not call it. If you said, hey, let's go to the Flavian Amphitheater, probably nobody would know what the heck you were talking about. But looking down on it from today, you can see kind of that false floor down there in the bottom. They would fill that with water, and they would put boats in it, and they would recreate battles, including the Battle of Actium. They would recreate the battle that Augustus fought against Pompey to start the empire. What's interesting is that there are all these different Colosseums all over the place, just like there are multiple football stadiums around, our country, and baseball stadiums around our country. There were many Colosseums across the empire. This one is in North Africa, across the Mediterranean, and it's incredibly well preserved. It's still there today. Oh, I'm going to blow your minds. Here's a connection to ancient Rome. The thumbs down and thumbs up likely came from the Colosseum games. The gladiators would look to the crowd to see if they got a thumbs up or thumbs down. Thumbs down meant whoever it was that the gladiator was fighting against probably going to get it. Outside, you got to train these gladiators. So near the Colosseum, there was the Ludus Magnus, which was just the gladiator school. And there are a few ruins of it still today there outside the Colosseum. And of course, the Forum. Don't worry. I'm not going to go into depth about the Forum. We already know that it was where the heart of government was, where the center of Roman activity was. But it was also probably where the first Romans lived, way back when. Something cool I know we haven't talked about, the Mausoleum of Augustus. This is where Augustus was buried. One of the first things he did when he became emperor was build this. It was ransacked by Alaric. Not that Alaric, the invader. He destroyed it and kind of looted it back in the 400s with the fall of Rome. The Pantheon, we've been talking about it. Pantheon just means every god. This is the temple that kind of housed all of the gods. What you may not know about the Pantheon, there it is today, in all of its glory, but whenever it rains, what we haven't talked about is that oculus at the very top of it. That's actually an opening that lets the light in. It's an opening, it's not a window. So when it rains, or on the weird occasion when it actually snows in Rome, and it has been known to snow, that the snow will fall down into the building. And so the rain falls down into the building, onto the floor of the building. They're pretty smartly designed, though, in that it has little drains in the floor for all of anything that's wet that collects at the bottom. It will drain out. And so the floor will be dry pretty quickly after the rain goes away or after the water dissipates. And there's that opening, that oculus showing, the sun and all of that sunlight coming through. The Pantheon is one of these buildings throughout history it is so incredibly important. Not only has it been copied numerous times, but it's also been emulated, meaning it's been influencing other buildings. There's this building at the University of Virginia here in the U.S. designed by Thomas Jefferson. It basically was built to copy the Pantheon. Even the Jefferson Memorial also kind of copies the look of the Pantheon. Inside the Jefferson Memorial, you can see the dome looks like those panels of the Pantheon. In the Tiber River, where Rome began, there's this island in the middle of the Tiber River that actually served as a temple to the god of healing. It's not just an awesome quest in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. It's actually, since the time of Romans, been a place for healing. There's still a hospital there, and they're connected by these ancient bridges, which are all over Rome, and they're still being used today. There's a picture of one right now over the Tiber River. Just imagine being able to set foot on a bridge that's been in place for 2,000 years that people in ancient times walked over. Here's another bridge still in use in Spain from the time of the Romans. Trajan's Market, built by Emperor Trajan, was one of the main marketplaces in ancient Rome. But really what you want to know about are Roman toilets. I'm sure you're all dying to hear about them. Everybody had used public toilets. The water for these came from aqueducts or bathhouses, and they were washed out. Just imagine being that guy. Slaves did have to clean the toilets and tend to them. But the most important thing is look how close these toilets were together. The Romans did not have the same sense of privacy that we have. Can you imagine just chilling with your buddies on the toilets, maybe touching legs while you did so? I cannot. Let's get to the 7 big contributions of the ancient Romans. The first being the Republic. Having a Senate, giving the people voice, was one of the first of its kind in history. Latin, the language that we speak, comes from Latin. Spanish comes from Latin. So many of the world's languages come from it. The Roman law, it unified the government. They followed the 12 tables, which were kind of a basis for our law. Roman roads helped facilitate travel, trade. The little arch, helped those Roman buildings stay strong. All these ruins still there, with the help of cement, of course. Romans invented it, which is awesome. And finally, Roman borders and some of these walls. These borders are still in place today in some countries. Not only can you see the walls, but some of the actual borders have been incorporated into the national boundaries of Europe. That said, one of our big questions has to be, in what ways did these contributions help make life easier in the Roman Empire? How do they make the empire flourish? Just think about that for a second. I think one of the big takeaways if I were to look at it, is the Roman Empire's staying power. The original empire lasts from 27 BCE to 476 CE, over 500 years. So they have all these great systems. They have land, money. So what happened? What went wrong? In short, what caused this great and powerful empire to crumble or start to crumble? This decline of the empire. And that's really what we're going to start to explore, is the causes of the fall, or if you want to use my word, I'd rather say the decline of the Roman Empire. And really, the decline of the Roman Empire can be divided into two different forces: internal forces and external forces. Internal forces are these forces or these problems that were caused from inside the empire, mostly people related, obviously. And then the external forces, also people related, but in a different way, were problems caused by forces outside of the empire. Mostly that dude with the bow and arrow, he and his buddies caused a lot of problems for the empire. So the internal forces, those are things like political problems, things with the government. Those are things like economic problems, things relating to money, also related to the government, and social problems, things relating to people and their problems. And we already know some of them. External forces, like I said, that guy with the bow and arrow, the invaders. The Romans called them barbarians. I don't, because that suggests that they're less than human or somehow uncivilized, which is just not true. So let's start to unpack these internal forces. Again, those are the things inside the empire that cause problems. The first being political forces. The first of these being emperor instability. I think between 200 and 300, the average, rule for an emperor was about 3 years, which meant that lots of people were always fighting to get that power. A lot of, political leaders, senators fighting against each other, a lot of corruption, a lot of soldiers easily bribed or, easily convinced to follow these leaders of armies. What that ended up doing is creating these armies that fought against each other inside the empire. And at the same time, the empire was so large, you had people invading, you had people inside the empire rebelling, and that the army was struggling to maintain order while it's struggling within itself. And then finally, you've got these, you have these large armies that start fighting each other. So these leaders of the provinces start fighting. Just imagine Washington and Oregon going at it in war.